What's up, cats and kittens? Today we're going to play Battletech Encounters, and I'm going to try to teach you as best I can. So, first thing, when you get the box, punch out all the tokens and set them aside. You'll notice the Noble Patronage and Censure tokens. Just put them in with everything else and we'll talk about it later. The goal of the game is to complete contracts and be the first player to score 10 reputation points. In order to take contracts, first you'll need to represent one of the more famous mercenary units from the Inner Sphere. You'll find them with the combat command cards. You can choose these however you want, but I recommend random selections to increase the fun factor. For this game, I'm going to choose the Grey Death Legion because it's an easy one. Note that each unit card has a special ability. If you don't understand this right now, don't worry, there'll be a segment for that later. Once you know what unit you represent, look at the top of the card, where you'll see 1 colored die next to 5 white dice. Go ahead and grab those out of the box, and for this example, the Grey Death Legion's colored die is yellow. These dice represent what's called your dice pool. The 5 white dice will be for everyone to use on their respective turns, but you'll retain the 1 colored die for yourself. Find your equipment, contracts, and encounters decks and set them up like you see on the screen after a good shuffle or 3. They will need a good amount of shuffling before you start. During the game, cards from the equipment deck will form what's called the black market. Deal out 5 cards in a row just like this. These cards represent things you can buy to enhance your odds of winning as the game goes on, and each has a type that's visible in the upper right-hand corner. For most encounters, these symbols won't be relevant, but they do pop up now and again, so let's take a look at them. Ballistic, energy, missile, and melee equipment each provide various bonuses and abilities to those that possess them, but some contracts or encounters will restrict how you're allowed to use them. On the left side of the card is a C-bill cost and a maintenance cost. The C-bill cost is what you'll pay to acquire the equipment, and the maintenance cost is what you'll pay in C-bills once you've used it. Using the equipment and maintenance will be later though, because the game just started, so you broke. In the contracts deck is where you'll find the assignments you can take to advance your reputation. In the top right-hand corner of each is the amount of reputation points you'll score for completing the contract. Not taking it, completing it. The steps you'll go through to actually complete a contract is something I'll touch on in just a second. Here's where we get to the real meat and potatoes of the game. These are the baddies you'll run into during the execution of your contracts. In the top right-hand corner of each, you'll see a number you'll have to match exactly with the dice you roll from your dice pool. That means when you roll all your dice, you'll have to choose from among them results that add up to the number you see on the encounter card exactly. If you can't, that means you ran into something stronger or faster than you. Okay, you've got the black market set up, it's your turn. Like I said, you have no money on your first turn, so you can't buy anything. Marvel for a moment and move on. Start by revealing 2 contracts and picking which one you want to try. We have Garrison Duty versus Planetary Assault, Northwind. Going on the Planetary Assault contract this early on seems like a bad idea, since every encounter would be more difficult. Garrison Duty doesn't offer much reputation, but it is easy to complete. Defeating a single encounter is all that's necessary to end the contract and score the rep. So, okay, let's take Garrison Duty. Now that you have your first contract, you'll flip over an encounter card. Oof, Clanners. There's the encounter value I mentioned before, here in the upper right-hand corner. To defeat the encounter, you'll take all the dice from earlier, the colored one and the 5 white dice, and roll them. From all these, you'll need to choose a number of dice with results that match the encounter value exactly. So from your results here, let's say you choose a 6 and a 3. You'll place them on top of the encounter, and they have to stay there either until your turn is over or until you complete the contract, whichever comes first. This means your dice pool going forward in this contract will be smaller, making subsequent encounters potentially more difficult. In order to complete a contract, score reputation, and make a lot of money, you have to continue to take on encounters until you have no dice left to roll at all. If your dice are not locked onto the various encounters you took on during the course of the contract, then the contract is not yet complete. With fewer dice to roll each time, this is where the push your luck element comes in. If you continue to take on additional encounters, the more likely it becomes that you'll run into one you can't match. If you reveal an encounter you can't match, either by rolling your remaining dice or the number being too high for you to meet, you default. This causes you to lose credit for all of the encounters you defeated on the contract, which means no money and no rep for you, and your turn is over to boot. There is a way you can avoid this awful fate, however. Before taking on a new encounter, you can choose to engage what's called the Escape Clause. It allows you to safely exit the contract without the risk of taking further encounters, and thus negates the risk of default. When you do this, you won't score any reputation points for the turn, but you will get paid for all the mayhem you caused along the way.
And speaking of money, since this garrison duty contract allows you to complete it after only one encounter and ending your turn, you're going to do what's called cashing out. Since this is your first contract of the turn, you'll make one C-bill for every encounter you defeated during the course of completion. You score 1 reputation point for the job and take 1 C-bill to the bank. Don't laugh, this will come in handy for you on your next turn.
To make it to 10 reputation points, you'll want to try and complete as many contracts as you can. After you get rich overnight, you're going to have lots and lots of money to spend. Right? Right. Money can go a long way to purchasing equipment that makes your life easier as you try to defeat each encounter during your turn. Before you reveal the contracts for your turn, you'll be able to purchase equipment on the black market. Most of these items are out of your price range, but now is when you get to take advantage of the Grey Death Legion's special ability. The first piece of equipment you buy in a turn can be reduced in cost by 1 C-bill down to a minimum of 1. So in this instance, your 1 C-bill is enough to acquire either Mask or the LBX autocannon. The LBX is powerful, but if I can't lock up all those dice, I gotta back out or I risk default. Mask allows you to adjust a die roll result by 2, which feels a little less risky. So you'll trade your 1 C-bill in for the Mask system and add it to what's called your equipment area, replacing the purchased equipment with something new from the top of the equipment deck. You can only have 4 pieces of equipment in this area at any one time, and must discard a piece before acquiring anything new when you're at full capacity. To gain the benefit from a piece of equipment, turn it face down on the table. This is called exhausting the resource, giving you a temporary benefit to help you defeat a taxing encounter. The equipment cannot be used again until the maintenance cost has been paid during the pre-contract buy phase. If you can't afford to maintain an equipment card or fail to do so before entering the contract phase, you go into the turn unable to use it. So make sure you pay your dues before you put on your shoes. If none of the equipment cards are to your liking, you can discard one from the line and replace it with the top card of the equipment deck. This can be done if there's a powerful piece of equipment on the line that you can't afford. But maybe an opponent could. You see what I'm getting at there? When you complete a contract in a turn, you may choose to take the action of extending the contract. You can take on as many contracts in one turn as you can successfully complete. You can also pay equipment maintenance costs before revealing a new contract. When extending a contract after having completed one, you'll only reveal 1 contract card, and for all subsequent contracts you take in the same turn. You must accept this contract. All your dice become available to you again, and you'll move this completed contract off to one side, along with all the encounters you defeated during its execution. This will become what's called Column 1. Your next contract and the encounters therein will become Column 2, and so on in this fashion as you take on multiple contracts in the same turn. The process begins again and goes on in this fashion until you've either completed enough contracts to win the game, exercise an escape clause, or default. If you default on any contract beyond your first for that turn, you'll lose all the reputation points you would have scored for that turn. But at the very least, you'll still be paid for all the encounters you beat in the contract you completed before you defaulted. You typically get paid after exercising an escape clause or after you complete a contract and don't want to take on anymore. As I mentioned, there are some instances which you can be paid after defaulting on a contract, but you'll always forfeit any reputation points you would have earned after a default. On the flip side of this situation, let's imagine you'd completed that contract by busting the heads of that indirect fire lance instead. When you cash out, you'll be paid 2 C-bills for each encounter you beat in column 2, 3 C-bills for each encounter you beat in your third contract of the turn, and so on and so forth. The payout increases as you accept more contracts in the same turn, but so does the reputation score. For your second complete contract in a turn, you'll score the reputation points printed on the card plus 1. Your third will get you the printed value plus 2, and so on. At any time, a player may find themselves defaulting on a contract that would have earned them a good bit of reputation. We're all mercenaries at heart, aren't we? When someone defaults on such a contract, the next player in the rotation can decide they want to take a crack at it during their turn, gaining the reputation points for themselves if they can complete it. This is what's known as stealing, securing the contract. Let's go back to before when you defaulted. I'm next in line, and I've decided to steal the contract from you on my turn. What can I say? I want all that sweet, sweet reputation for myself. When stealing, I'll begin my turn by picking up where you left off. The only thing that's discarded is the encounter you couldn't defeat. However, here's where this gets tricky, so pay attention. When stealing, the amount of dice I'll have access to is limited by how many of your own you locked up while you were busy trying to score. If you'd locked 2 of your white dice on this clan Firestar here, I'd have a few options. Take a fresh encounter and roll with my colored die and 3 white dice, or trade my colored die for one of the white dice you locked. Why would I do that? Some contracts affect specific dice colors, and a strategic move could be to trade away a colored die you couldn't roll for an unrestricted white die. Similarly, some equipment allows you to add extra dice into your pool for the turn. These are called bonus dice and aren't available to me when stealing. The one exception to this is if you happen to lock any colored dice on an encounter somewhere. If you possessed a card like this improvised weapon, for example, you could exhaust the resource and add 2 black dice to your pool for the remainder of your turn. If you had, I could trade my colored die for one of yours locked on an encounter. I could also trade a white die in this way. Equipment like this hardened armor would become even more effective than it already is if I possessed it in my equipment area at the time. Similarly, some contracts give bonuses to certain colors of dice. Another strategic move could be to trade my colored die out for a color the contract grants a bonus to. If I can complete it, I'll steal all 7 reputation points out from under you, and not only will I be paid for the 2 encounters I personally took care of, but also for the one you took care of before you defaulted. It's a quite lucrative deal for me, you see. Since these encounters are in column 2, I'll collect 6 total C-bills. It's important to note here that if you default on your first contract of the turn and someone wants to take it over, the rules wording indicates the player stealing the contract will be paid for the encounters you beat before your default. If you exercise an escape clause on any contract beyond your first in a turn, you'll still be paid for all the encounters you were able to defeat, despite scoring no reputation for the turn. If you default on any contract beyond your first in the turn, you'll lose all the reputation points you would have scored for that turn, but at the very least, you'll still be paid for all the encounters you beat in the contract you completed before you defaulted. More than one player can attempt to steal a contract, but in the case of multiple failures and multiple attempts to steal, such a contract or set of contracts can only circle the table one time. Once it makes its way back to the original player, that player must start over from scratch and everything from the previous contract is lost. If you want the contract to go away after you default on it, you can sacrifice 2 reputation points and do what's called burning the contract. This will stop all rival players from being able to secure it. The next player in line will have to start their turn normally instead of being able to muscle in on the action. It's important to note here that any player can always choose to start their turn fresh with new contracts and not worry about what the previous player was doing. Okay, let's switch gears. When the Noble Patronage and Censure tokens come into play, each has an effect that either helps or hinders. The Noble Patronage token is there to give you a safety net when you default on a contract. Instead of getting nothing after you default, you can instead collect 2 C-bills and pass the token to the player with the least amount of money. If that's still you after taking the dough, you get to keep it. If there's a tie, you get to decide where it goes. Similarly, the Censure token means hard times are upon you. When the MRBC is mad at you, ain't no place you can hide. What this means for you is the player to your left is going to look at the top 2 cards of the contract deck and pick one for you every time you would reveal a contract. That's the one you get to take. After you cash out or default, you pass the token to the player with the most reputation. If that's still you, you keep the token, but you also get to choose who it goes to if there's a tie. Remember, the Noble Patronage token is tied to money and the Censure token is tied to reputation. Noble Patronage is meant to help a struggling outfit. Censure is to try and hinder the player closest to winning. If any card comes up that says for you to take either of these, it doesn't matter who's currently holding them or how long they've had it. You take the token and apply its effects at the next available opportunity. Now let's look at all the other units. You already know how the Grey Death Legion works, so I'll start with another easy one. The Kellhounds give you the Noble Patronage token at the beginning of the game. Can be useful if you default on an early contract. When you're playing as the Eridani Lighthorse, you can reveal the top 2 contracts from the contract deck and choose from among them which you'd like to take, once per turn. Nice to reveal 2 contracts and choose between them when it's your second or third contract in a turn. You feel me? When you're Big Mac on the attack, you score an extra reputation point whenever you complete a contract with the words Planetary Assault in the title. If you're Wayne Waco, you can throw caution to the wind and snag the Censure token to re-roll up to 4 dice, but you gotta keep the token until the end of your next turn before it can be passed around as normal. Can be a way to power your way through a contract that's giving you fits. The Wolf's Dragoons are the masters of technological wonder. You can look at the top 3 cards of the equipment deck once per turn and must choose one to replace a card in the black market. This can be a useful ability right before taking on a second or third contract, finding a shiny new toy to replace an exhausted one and get you from point A to point B. The Northwind Highlanders can score lots of extra rep, but only on the Garrison Duty or Planetary Assault Northwind contracts. But if you're the 21st Centauri Lancers, you can't be censured. Like, at all. Just get rid of the token if it's handed to you. When you come up on the Moral Quandary card from the Encounters deck, pitch it and draw again. You're the 21st Centauri Lancers. Shit like this doesn't happen to you. Each colored die is represented twice throughout all the unit cards. This is all pretty straightforward, so let's go now to the segment I'm going to call... In this segment, I'm going to go over a few last things to get everyone on the same page. When you come up on an encounter with the salvage text, once you've dealt with it and cashed out, you'll reveal equipment cards until you find one that has a maintenance cost. You can add it to your equipment area or discard it if you're full and you're happy with what you have. If you default on a contract that contains a salvage card, you don't acquire any. You'll still pick up salvage for any contracts you complete or exercise an escape clause on. When you whoop these guys, they come to join you. Hang on to it, but it doesn't count toward your equipment total. You can discard them to add +1 onto any die result. When you come up on encounter cards that restrict your ability to use certain types of equipment or colors of dice, it means you can't exhaust any equipment of that type to help defeat the encounter, and you can't roll any of the dice of the specified color. If you actually own the equipment type the encounter restricts, you'll get paid extra if you defeat the encounter because it was tough without your stuff. You're going to come up on encounters that represent exceptionally fast units or technologically advanced ones. These units are tougher to defeat and must be beaten twice with the same roll of your dice. This means for this electronic warfare lance here, you'll need to roll your dice pool and lock dice on the card to match the encounter value twice. As in, you'll need to lock in 2 separate combinations that make a 5. So a single die showing a 5 and 2 dice showing 4 and 1, for example, will defeat the encounter 2 times and satisfy the card stipulation. You'll get paid extra for whooping these lances when you cash out because they're more difficult to defeat. When you see a contract that tells you specific types of equipment can't be maintained, that's only going to be relevant to you if you accept multiple contracts in the same turn. It means you can't pay to maintain that equipment in between contracts or roll that color of dice at all for as long as that contract is out on the table. Same goes for contracts that make certain equipment types cheaper or more expensive to maintain. This card is pretty straightforward. Choose to default or take the censure token after locking up to 4 dice. You can lock only 1 and keep going with the censure token, or you can lock all your dice and complete a contract if you have 4 or less remaining in your pool. The downside here is completing a contract early means less money for you when you cash out, not to mention being censured. Yes, this card can also help you win the game if you use it to complete a contract that would get you to 10 reputation points. Finally, let's talk about dice manipulation. Cards that allow you to set the results of dice can't be used to achieve a result you can't actually roll on 1d6. Cards that show multiple dice can affect up to the number of dice shown at the time you exhaust the resource. Equipment that allows you to adjust the results of a roll adjusts a roll by exactly the number it says on the card. The rulebook has some FAQs and a small segment on the other equipment effects I didn't talk about here. But if you have any other questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below. Battletech Encounters is a fun game and a quick way to get some Battletech in your life if you only have a short while. I recommend giving it a go. It's got lots of replayability and you can get several people in on one game. Whenever you run out of cards, you just shuffle the discards and turn them into the appropriate deck so you can keep on going. It really is fun. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope you better understand the game now. If you like what we do here on the channel, do me a solid and subscribe. Turn on all notifications so you can find out exactly where Battlebound is going to turn up next. Thanks again for watching. I'm Tuckdavian and I'll see you next time right here out on the Space Lanes.
There's a 10.
There's a 10. He's got it.
2 dice.
All right. Now, do you want to take another encounter?
4 left.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
I will look at them. Oh.
Well, you don't have to stick them with that.
I don't have to stick him with that. How many dice does he have?
He has exactly 4.
Oh, so if I stick him with that, he can complete the contract and score 4 fucking rep. Yeah, I don't want you to have that one. Here, you
Right.
you can take that one.
Okay. Need a 6.
Oh my God!
He's got it multiple different ways.
He's got it.
It depends on
yeah,
how many you
baby,
want to lock.
he's got
Okay,
it.
you don't have any lockup dice.
No.
Roll. I mean,
Roll 3s are wild.
okay, so you have a 3. You could turn that 1 die. If you were to do that, you could turn that 1 die into the 6 that's needed.
Yeah. True.
Okay.
Or, I mean, hold on, put that back. Let's say you're trying to get to 6, right?
Right.
If you change that down to a 1, right? Boop. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You only need to reduce that 4 by 2. Well, your supercharger will do that. So if you exhaust the supercharger, you could take the 4 down to a 2 and then have 6 on all 4 dice, therefore completing the contract, scoring the rep, and getting paid.
Rolled 3. Okay, so
He changed the 3 to a 1.
3 to a 1.
Which left him with a 1, a 2, and a 1.
Right.
Then he had a 4. But you used the supercharger to -2 off of the 4 down to a 2, and now you're stuck with 2, 4, 6.
Right.
That locks up the contract for him, which
Right.
because he's Big Mac, he'll score 4 rep and 2 C-bills if he just cashes out right now. Let's do it! Let's cash out! See?
All right.
That's how you do that shit.
Well, let me have...
Remember, you have to be a subscriber and leave a comment. Crowdfunding is when lots of people give you small amounts of money to help your passion project come to life.